In 2019, YouTube was caught violating the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Since settling, YouTube has enacted new policies that are meant to serve as a smokescreen so they can dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. As such, for my own protection, it is my obligation to advise you that this video is not aimed at children. My target audience is not children. Parental discretion is advised. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Now that I have finished reviewing the digital bundle Dark Shadows, the Quentin Collins Collection, all that's left to do is ranking. I won't spend too long on this, but you know how it goes. We'll go from number 8, because there's only 8 stories in the set, my least favorite, to number 1, my favorite. At the end of each review, I gave each story a ranking out of 10. Rating out of 10. For this ranking, I am going to ignore those scores because those ratings were based on looking at the stories on their own merits. And now I am comparing the stories against each other, which means a different result will be produced. So without further ado, let's just jump into that and stick around until the end of the video for, for info on what's coming up next after this. So starting us off at number 8, The Creeping Fog. This was my least favorite story in the set. I think it was the weakest in the set. Ultimately, what lets this one down is its pacing. It moves at an incredibly slow pace, and rather than being a proper slow burn story, this one ultimately just comes off feeling dull. David Selby and Matthew Waterhouse are both great, Matthew Waterhouse in particular, with an absolutely chilling third act, but this story is such a slog to get through. Because I've talked about this before, I try to give every story I review, at least audio, 2 listens. Just to make sure I have a good grasp on the story and I know everything I want to talk about. The second listen was so much of a chore because the snail's pace was just so dreadfully slow. Number 7, Operation Victor. Now, this one, I still don't know what happened to this. Again, talking about how I give every story 2 listens. The first listen through, I liked this story. I didn't think it was the best at the time, but I thought it was okay. But I don't know what happened. My second time listening through this, I just didn't enjoy it. I think part of it is just Big Finish kind of has a problem doing very action-oriented stories. For the most part, I think director Ken Bentley, has the best track record with purely action stories, but man, they are just so hard to do. This story just kind of fell flat for me. And I think the best example of that is Terry Malloy. He is really good in this story for the most part, but he feels really restrained, because he's playing a Nazi scientist who is creating monsters to take over the world. And there's a scene towards the middle end of this story where he goes into this sort of screaming rant, and it just kind of clicked with me there that he is restraining himself because it's very obvious he's trying not to do Davros. And he's mostly good. David Selby is mostly good, but this story just, there are some body horror elements, but there's no tension to it. It just, again, this story just falls flat. Ultimately, the reason it ranks above The Creeping Fog is because I did like it on my first listen through, and I just don't know what happened. Number 6, The Skinwalkers, the first story in the Quentin Collins Collection. The Skinwalkers is kind of a mixed bag for me. It's very half and half, because the story itself, it's actually really good. A story about Quentin meeting another great love of his life and the tragedy that ultimately leads him to turning off his humanity for a brief period of time. It's more sensitive than it sounds. Because Quentin's immortal, he's kind of gone through tragedy and success so many times. Not the point. But the problem is with the Skinwalkers, it's the presentation that lets it down. Like I said, my biggest problem is David Selby's direction in this, because a trick audiobook readers will often use To escalate tension, to increase the tension, they will start reading the prose faster and faster and faster. The problem is, it feels like David Selby is rushing through this entire narrative, you know? He's going a mile a minute, he's got no room to breathe, and it kind of lets the story down because it's all at this one consistent pace, you know? There's nothing slowed down, nothing sped up. Also, this story kind of doesn't use Laura Parker the best either. I talked about this in my review. Quentin is talking about this woman he fell in love with, and while Parker is playing Angelique, who Quentin is telling this story to, I feel like she could have also played the woman in the narrative itself. And like I said, she's just not used the best. But yeah, that's all I can really boil the Skinwalkers down to. Great story, less than great execution. Number 5, Blood Dance. The second story in this set, this is a huge improvement in quality over the Skinwalkers. David Selby as a narrator works so much better here, and the direction is much better as well. This is Dark Shadows' take on a noir story, like I said in my review, with Quentin in the hard-boiled detective kind of role. He's not playing a detective in this story, that's just the closest equivalence I can make. And Lisa Richards as the femme fatale is really good as well. Like, you can tell she is reveling in this type of role with just how much fun she's having. The music for this story is really good, especially the theme for the Arcadia Club. And there is a lot of haunting imagery in this story. Not full-on body horror, but the way certain scenes are described and what's happening throughout this story, it's just haunting, yeah, is the right word for it. Number 4, Panic. I feel really bad putting Panic at number 4 because it's so good. But the problem is the remaining stories are also all really good. Like, oh god. David Selby is great. Susan Sullivan is great. The premise of this story is great. I like how it veers away from the traditional gothic horror romance and tells a more lighthearted fantasy adventure type story. Pan is a really good villain. I'm going to be really brief on this one because I just reviewed it. So, yeah, really the only thing with Panic is, while it's really good, I like the remaining 3 stories so much more. Number 3, The Darkest Shadow. This story is double the length of a regular story from the dramatized readings range of the Dark Shadows audios. But it uses its time really well. As I said earlier at the start of this list, like The Creeping Fog, this is a slow burn story. But it's handled so much better here. The pacing is really well done, and the tension and atmosphere is really well done. Donna McKechnie is a great leading lady. The premise is really creative. Like I said, this is Big Finish's Big Finishes. This is Dark Shadows. Shadows is the Holy Terror. As you know, there's a lot of similarities between this and the Doctor Who audio. You know, there's a really creative concept. Charles Delaware Tate is really used, and you know what he was is really used well. And the story ends on a really tragic note, which sometimes I really enjoy. You know, I think I may have said this before. Tragic romance is one of my favorite genres. Oh boy, I am sadistic. Number 2, London's Burning. I don't even know where to begin because I gushed about this story in my review. Again, really strong performance from David Selby, but his co-star in this, Louise Jameson, just absolutely steals the show. Her performance throughout this entire thing is pretty much the shining light of what is already a very spectacular, very strong story. I like how it tackles that sort of mystery, whatever you want to call it, of spontaneous human combustion, even if it isn't really, even if that plot point is not handled the best, but more it's about the mystery of, you know, what is going on with Rosie Faye. Like, why is she tied to all these deaths happening? And, you know, the way Louise Jameson just plays all of these other characters throughout this story, it's something else. Like, I really recommend just experiencing this one for Louise Jameson's stellar performance alone, keeping in mind that the rest of the story is really good too. I really want to end this with by singing I'm Gonna Dance for You, but I'm not gonna do that. Number 1. My favorite story in the Quentin Collins Collection. The Haunted Refrain. This story, just, first of all, the tension and the atmosphere is phenomenal. Every time Barbara goes and speaks to Quentin, the tension just keeps ramping up. You know, because every time she plays a record, something new happens. Speaking of Barbara, Karen Jean Olds is just stellar, because she is the focus of this story. She pretty much has to carry the entire hour plus, almost by herself, and she is brilliant. And like I said, in a story like this, I like that her husband isn't vilified to justify her spending time with Quentin. I said that several times in my review, but it's a point I want to keep making. You can do a story like this where a woman feels drawn to another man who is not her spouse without making the husband a villain. And, you know, if anything, she's sort of the one painted in the wrong, and she kind of realizes it. Boy, this is going down a weird road, and I'm really going to stop there before it gets weirder. But yeah, this is just a brilliant, edge-of-your-seat supernatural thriller as you try to figure out what happened to Quentin, what's going on, how is he going to get out of this, and just what's going to happen to Barbara and Grant when he does. Because you kind of start getting the feeling that in order for him to get out of the gramophone, things are not going to end well for them. And for him to get out, they can end well. Which just leads to an absolutely brutal, chilling finale to a really chilling story. And then that post-credits stinger, oh, that was freaky. Like, this is the horror of Dark Shadows at its best. And there you have it. That was my ranking of Dark Shadows, the Quentin Collins Collection. Have you heard the stories in this collection? What's your ranking? Start a conversation in the comments below. At the start of the video, I said I would share what's coming up next. And I'm going back to Doctor Who audios. Now, my original plan, because 2021 is the 50th anniversary of The Master, my original plan was to review the Master trilogy. And You Will Obey Me, Vampire of the Mind, and The Two Masters. However, for the time being, I'm going to stick a pin in that. I'm still going to review it this year. I'm just going to come back to it later, because one downside to Big Finish's advertising that I don't like, personally, is that when they announce a release, or a release shows up for purchase on their website, they announce the month and the year it is releasing. They don't give a full date. So, the bottom line is, my number one most anticipated Big Finish release of this year is releasing this month. Master, the Eric Roberts Master spin-off series. And, you know, because it's supposed to release because it's supposed to release in March, and these reviews have already taken me fairly into March, I want to wait to review Master first before I tackle the Master trilogy, and then have to stop doing the trilogy to review Master, because I as far as Master is concerned, I kind of want to stay relevant on that. So after these reviews, I'm going to take a hiatus, and depending on how long it is, will depend on when Master releases, and then I will do the Master trilogy. So other than that, remember to like, comment, subscribe, click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload, share the video around. All of this helps my channel grow. And this is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys next time.